Welcome back to The Price of Business. I am your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ebola situation out there. You know, there's a lot of talk about it. I just heard this morning on National Public Radio a poll finding 12% of all Americans believe that someone they know, a family member or a friend, will come, actually no, just family members, someone in their family will come down with Ebola over the next year, which, according to the public health care experts, that doesn't seem plausible, but it does show you how much alarm is out there, much of which I think is media-driven. I wanted to bring in an expert to be able to talk about this topic, and so I'm delighted to have Darrell Henry on the program, Executive Director of the Healthcare Coalition. Darrell, welcome to the program. Kind of give us your elevator speech to get us started.
Thanks, Kevin. Our organization deals with emergency preparedness and hospitals, and we started following the issue when it kind of broke because we knew there was going to be some problems with our healthcare system and Ebola and being able to take care of people and being prepared. We were the first ones to call out the waste issue and recognize that it was going to be a problem that the hospitals and the federal government and the states were going to have to address. We also kind of recognized that not all hospitals are going to be prepared to treat Ebola, and that some hospitals are now around the country in different states are designating different facilities for people to accept and treat Ebola patients. And we've seen great work by the people in Nebraska, you know, taking care of folks with Ebola, and unfortunately you had the problems in Texas with Texas Presbyterian and their issues taking care of Ebola. So it's an issue we're tracking. It's an issue that people should be rightly concerned about, but it certainly isn't an issue where you're likely to have a family member who's going to get Ebola.
Very unlikely, like probably a percentage of a percentage, you think?
Yeah, the people who are going to be in harm's way really are either the responders and the people who are at the front lines, the medical professionals, you know, because it's to get Ebola, and we've heard this before, it's basically the body fluids is how the virus transmits. And unless you're in contact with a sick person's body fluids who is symptomatic, the likelihood of you getting it is non-existent.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about these governors and their response to people coming back from the front lines of Ebola. Are they going too far? Give us your thoughts about that.
Well, we need to watch these people because these are, like I said, these are the people who are most likely to get it. You know, putting someone in a tent probably wasn't the most appropriate thing to do. However, having someone under watch and under self-quarantine and not roaming the streets when an area where they could become symptomatic is probably wise. You have a lot of people on the front lines. Obviously, we saw in New York with a doctor who did come back and did get sick and was out in public while he was symptomatic. So I think there's a happy medium. I think there's a little bit of an overreaction in New York and New Jersey, and certainly I think the federal government, by saying we don't need to do anything, was underreacting. So we kind of need to look towards a happy medium. Yeah,
that third response that seems to be so evasive, so hard to get. You know, where we practice caution, but we don't create hysteria. Do you think the media has gone too far? How would you grade the media at explaining what we're dealing with here?
Well, I think there was a learning curve. People didn't know, and when you have a lack of knowledge, there's a vacuum, and then there's a fear. So I think they were covering it. I think they were right to basically have the attention to it because it's a dangerous disease. Fortunately, we're able to treat it. We have a much higher success rate of curing folks who get the disease than you would, say, if you were in Africa. So back to the thing. It's a balance. It's a common sense, giving people what they need to know. And but in Texas with Presbyterian, that was a concern. There was crisis every day. Things were changing every day. We were all learning about this, and we were reacting to it. And now we know a lot more, and we're able to plan. And other states then can look to Texas. You know, they've established this task force. There's looking at what they can do within their state to better address it the next time. And that's kind of a lesson learned that other states should be looking at and following their model of setting up a task force and figuring out how are they going to address it if someone walks off a plane and has Ebola, because that's the most likely thing to happen in the United States of how it's going to get back here.
So tell me all that the Healthcare Coalition for Emergency Preparedness does.
We look at what overlooked things in preparedness regarding healthcare. And we found time and time again that transportation constraints can really impact the operational sustainability of a hospital. Look at Hurricane Sandy a couple of years ago. Really, the floods impacted the hospitals where they had to close, not just because they had water in the hospital, but because they couldn't get supplies in and out of their hospitals. They were not prepared to deal with their vendors to get stuff to and from the hospital, so they ran out of the ability to operate and function, so they had to close. We've seen that with Katrina. We've seen that in 9/11. Time and time again, during an emergency, the transportation issue is the one that is the most difficult challenge for hospitals.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Any final thoughts on what the focus should be going forward on this issue?
Well, like I said, the states need to be looking at it across the board and having their own task force put together of how they're going to deal with it. We need to recognize that not all hospitals are prepared to treat Ebola, and we need to put some more emergency preparedness in place. We need to make sure that the hospitals that do take care of Ebola are able to deal with infection control from the creation to the destruction of the materials, the waste products from Ebola, or other diseases like it that could come to the United States at any time. So we need to be prepared for that. And lastly, we need to have a task force like Texas is looking at that if someone with a disease like that walks, off a plane into the United States, that we have mobile facilities, waste treatment, supply infrastructure that can then treat the patients with trained people at the hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was a morality tale for Texas Presbyterian, and I think I'm kind of glad it happened early because I think it shook things up in a healthy way. Don't you think?
It did. And I'll leave it with this. At this scale, if we have just a few patients, we can identify the facilities that can treat them. But if we have a large-scale outbreak of Ebola, of another disease like Ebola, like a lost disease or Category A, or a large outbreak in a flu pandemic, we need to be looking at alternative facilities that are outside our hospitals so we can keep our hospitals operating for the people day-to-day who are sick and need them and treat this in a separate manner. It's a whole other discussion, but I think it's a lesson learned that we need to look at Ebola, that we're using Ebola to look at going forward.
Darrell Henry has been our guest, Executive Director of the Healthcare Coalition. You can learn more about him at healthcareprep.org, healthcareprep.org. Thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
All right, when we come back, much more for you. Do want to remind you, best content here does show up over there at usdailyreview.com. Meanwhile, see you tomorrow for another great program.